Hello there. My name is Martin, and I'm 65 years old. I've lived quite an eventful life, but the events of a recent Christmas family party are something I can never forget. It taught me a lot about life, but mainly standing up for myself and for others. For the past 46 years, I've had the pleasure of being married to the love of my life, Diana. We were college sweethearts who bonded over our shared love for literature and music. What's more, we were both aspiring authors as well. We soon got married shortly after college, and while the road ahead was a bumpy one, we always stuck by each other. Diana worked on a science fiction novel which went on to become a bestseller, while I worked as an English professor at a renowned university and was even invited to guest lecture at different colleges. I never got around to writing my own novel, and I would never get around to it until much, much later. Our lives, although not extravagant, were quite fulfilling for the two of us. Diana and I went on to have a beautiful boy named Philip, and he was the apple of our eye. He was intelligent, kind, and sensitive. Unlike Diana and I, he was more interested in science and eventually took up engineering in high school. He graduated with top honors and landed an excellent job at a software development firm. A few years later, he got married to a gentle soul named Lucy. She was a painter and a wonderful woman, and Diana and she bonded a lot over their shared interests in art. As parents, Diana and I were extremely happy that our son had found happiness and had settled down so well in life. Lucy seemed to bring out the best in him, and the two of them thrived as they were the perfect support system for each other. Philip was a shy child and even hid things from Diana and me, but Lucy brought about a sense of vulnerability and self-confidence in him, something we dearly loved to see as parents. But oh, how we wished he hadn't turned on us, the way he eventually would in life. They say that those closest to you are the ones who surprise you the most. And that was tragically true in our case, and how. To be honest, as we reflected on the past, Diana and I wished that we had tried to understand him better. As two creative parents, we never really understood Philip and his world of science. There was always a sense of disconnect between us. He would often say that we never really understood him. Additionally, his being a very sensitive and soft-spoken child meant that he would refuse to share his troubles with us, and this would lead to frequent arguments. But with Lucy in his life, Diana and I figured that this marked the start of a new chapter, one where Philip felt comfortable with us and opened up more. But even though it seemed that way, Philip distanced himself further from us. Once he landed his first job, he insisted on moving out of our house and shifting into his own apartment with Lucy. We were happy for him and we thought things were going well in his life, until one shocking evening. Lucy had invited us to dinner and Diana and I eagerly visited their apartment. However, before we could ring the doorbell, we heard a loud fight in their living room. "I told you I didn't want them. Why did you call them over? I'm ridiculously tired. I just thought it would be a good thing." "That's the problem. You think things without consulting me and make these stupid mistakes. Philip, why are you... If they're here, you better get them out of this damn house. Or if they're on the way, you call them and tell them to shut up and turn around back home. They're your parents. I just thought it would be a nice thing. So what? I don't care a damn about them. How could you call them to dinner without asking me? Fix this mess right now. I'm in no mood." My heart sank as I listened to the heated exchange between Philip and Lucy. Diana and I were heartbroken listening to the conversation. We never considered that Philip saw us as a burden or hated us this much. We quietly left without ringing the doorbell and returned home. Lucy called us later and was very apologetic, but we'd heard everything we had to. Diana cried a lot that day, and I was devastated. We no longer recognized who our son was anymore. The sweet boy we once raised was all but a stranger to us now. We were hurt, angry, and mainly confused by how much he seemed to resent us. But given how furious he was, we respectfully kept our distance. The two of us were shaken, and following this, we often wondered where we went wrong as parents. Perhaps if we'd listened to him as a child, been there for him. Diana and I couldn't stop blaming ourselves for raising whom we thought was a perfect man, but turned out to be a complete stranger. We kept in touch with them over the years, but not as much as we would have liked to. My university course load became more extensive, and Diana became occupied with her third novel. The two of us kept ourselves engaged with our work, but unfortunately the distance between Philip and us only grew wider. We never really understood the root of his frustrations, but I wish we'd tried to understand him better. Unfortunately, he never let us in. But what pained us the most was not knowing how much worse it would get. A few years later, Lucy reached out to us and let us know that Philip and she had just welcomed a baby boy named Francis. Diana and I were amazed by the news. We were now grandparents, and it was the first time in years that Philip welcomed us into his home. Diana volunteered to help out as Francis grew up. However, Philip sternly refused. Unfortunately, he appreciated the thought, but he didn't want anything to do with us. We realized he expected us to keep our distance again, and so we did with a heavy heart, until one day I received a telephone call from Lucy. "What is it, Lucy?" "I don't know how to say this, but we're having a difficult time." "Darling, if there's a problem, Diana and I can come over." "It's not that. It's about the money. Philip's been laid off." "Oh my God, why didn't he tell us?" "He didn't want to. He was very clear about that, but the expenses are becoming too much for us, and I could do with your support." "Sure, dear, anything you need." "We have some money, but it's just..." "Just what?" "Well, Philip spends all the money on gambling and booze. There's really no getting him to stop. I'm worried about our future." "Don't worry, Lucy. We'll figure this out." I suppose the events that followed were ultimately led to the events of the future. Diana and I helped Philip and Lucy immediately. Philip was enraged by our help, but I had a stern conversation with him about his habits and how he had family now and needed to mend his ways. He felt criticized, I'm sure, but I never imagined my son would become so blinded by his ego in the years to come. Although they needed the help, Philip was furious that Lucy went behind his back to ask for our help. He considered us as nothing less than nagging people who should leave him alone. But thankfully, the money helped them land on their feet. And while later, Philip found a job again as an IT consultant, and things were going great for him and his family, our relationship was still strained, since he probably felt guilty and angry about us loaning him money and lecturing him. He began pulling away from us again. Philip even restricted us as grandparents, withholding us from seeing Francis often. To him, Francis was his only son, and I would later learn that he didn't want his son to suffer the way he did. In hindsight, I wish I hadn't been so hard on him about wasting his money, because that turned out to be a resentment he held for years. Diana and Lucy continued to meet as close friends, but nothing could prepare us for how things were going to unfold in the future. 7 years later, on one evening, a college seminar required me to visit an orphanage. It was a workshop to encourage young creative minds, and it was here that I met a young boy named Mark. Little did I know that meeting this boy would forever change our lives. Mark was a bright spark, and moreover, an inspiring author. He was an excellent writer, and this helped foster a close bond between us. He was still in high school, but I decided to tutor him in English. We formed a close relationship as we'd talk for hours, and Mark would discuss the new novel he was working on. There was something incredible about conversing with him. His kindness and passion for writing reminded me of why I wanted to be an author in the first place. He even encouraged me to work on my own novel. I always figured Francis and Mark could make for great young friends, but Philip continued to shield Francis from us. Over the course of nearly a decade, I suppose we only met him only once each year, much to our disappointment. One evening, I invited Mark home for dinner, and Diana was so impressed by him. She was simply left speechless. Mark was a fan of her novel, and she loved the idea for his upcoming book as well. The three of us shared an amazing evening, discussing literature and blasting music together. I know this sounds negative, but Mark was like the grandson Diana and I never had. Given that we rarely ever interacted with Francis, Mark was the closest bond we had to an actual grandson. One day I met Mark, however, his face was covered with bruises. I asked him afterward if he was all right, and he admitted that he had been severely bullied and beaten up by some students on campus. "What happened, Mark?" "It was nothing, Mr. Tolley. Just a couple of kids playing rough." "What did they say?" "They just bullied me for being a fatherless kid." "How dare they? Who were the students?" "It doesn't matter. They said that I'm not worthy of being here." I was deeply hurt and distressed after listening to this. I consoled Mark and made sure he was all right. But the very same day, I reached home and shared the news with Diana. It affected both of us and made us want to hold on to Mark and protect him as if he were our own. Finally, after some consideration and given our attachment to Mark, we decided to formally adopt him. It was a spontaneous decision, but following the bullying incident, there was an almost parental instinct in me to protect Mark from any harm. Therefore, Diana and I decided that we wanted to take care of this young man for the rest of our lives. It was an impulsive decision, but there was something heartfelt about the connection the three of us had formed together. While Philip purposely alienated us from his family, it felt as though we had our own little family with Mark by our side. Even though it was the best decision we'd made, Diana, Mark, and I were clueless about the maddening emotional roller coaster this would lead to. Diana and I broke the news about Mark to Lucy, who in turn shared the information with Philip. We were very concerned about their reaction, but part of us thought that we ought to let them know. Lucy seemed overjoyed, whereas Philip seemed so upset that he even refused to speak to us on the phone. However, in the years to follow, Lucy and Diana would organize small gatherings to let Francis and Mark get closer as siblings and strengthen their bond. But there was a certain hostility that never seemed to go away. I never really understood what was the root of it. It seemed as though Philip was bitter and jealous of Mark, and he passed down the hatred to Francis too. During those gatherings, Francis began pulling malicious pranks on Mark, but the worst one was something none of us guessed until a few years later. Francis came over to our place one day and interacted a little with Mark, but then left abruptly. A few days later, Mark realized that the manuscript of his book was missing. He desperately searched for it everywhere, but to no avail. Diana and I helped him too, but couldn't seem to find it anywhere. I suspected that Francis had something to do with it. But when we confronted him, all of them, including Lucy, denied this. To settle down the tension, Diana even proposed a family lunch. Surprisingly, Philip now expressed a genuine interest in meeting Mark. For the first time in years, it felt like our family was coming together again. Little did I know, I may have spoken too soon. As the day unfolded, the atmosphere during lunch turned awkward. Lucy spoke warmly to Diana, Mark, and me as she tried to lighten the mood. But there was some invisible tension between Philip and Francis versus the rest of us. The two of them seemed to hold some strong hostility towards Mark, and I detected a sense of jealousy. Philip spoke to Mark for a while, but Francis completely ignored him. I happened to hear Philip and Mark's conversation, and it simply shocked me. "I hear you're a writer." "Yes, I am." "Well, writing's for losers. You're not going to make any money. You're just going to be broke for life." "I'm actually pretty confident about this novel. Science is where it's at. My son's studying science. He's going to make it big. You, on the other hand, are not." "How are you so sure?" "It's true. My mother got lucky, but my father didn't. And you're going to end up like him. Teaching at a damn community college, because that's all you're good for. What's funny is that you're going to end up like him even though you aren't his son." "Philip, that's enough!" I wasn't able to control myself. I couldn't stand Philip's rude comments anymore. It felt unusual to yell at my own son to protect Mark, but I felt a rush of emotions come over me. Francis rushed to his father's side to support him. "My father's right. Mark's going to end up broke. He doesn't even belong here. He's not family." "Francis!" There was a shocking silence. Mark burst into tears and hurried off into his room as Philip and I had a heated exchange. It was a terrible day as Philip, Francis, and Lucy hurried out while Diana and I were shattered by everything that had just happened. I couldn't imagine where this anger came from. Philip, I could perhaps understand, but Francis seemed to go entirely on his father, and it devastated me. This incident, plus being unable to find his manuscript, is what made Mark especially upset in the days that followed. But the family lunch was nowhere close to the explosive events that were to come. I once returned home to find Diana working on a new novel, but there seemed to be something else on her mind. "What's wrong, sweetie?" "I'm not able to focus on the book. I'm just really torn up about Mark not finding his manuscript. I wonder where it is." "He'll find it. I'm sure it's still around somewhere." "It isn't, Martin. I'm worried about him, and there's also one other thing." "What is it?" "It's strange, but Lucy stopped talking to me. She's blocked me on my cell phone, and it seems like Philip and Francis have too. I saw Lucy in the park today, but she ignored me." "That is strange. Maybe it's just a misunderstanding. They're having some trouble." "I guess, but Lucy usually tells me everything." I'm sure it's nothing, sweetie, don't worry about it. But we could have never guessed the truth behind Lucy's behavior. Her avoidance of us continued to bother Diana, and the missing manuscript seemed to deeply trouble Mark as well. I decided to take a short break from my teaching to help Mark and Diana out. I would sit with them at home, helping around the house so that the two of them could focus on their writing. I motivated Mark to start over with his manuscript and not be discouraged by such a setback. Diana also seemed to be making incredible progress on her new novel. I didn't mind taking a backseat with my own book, because the joy of watching Mark and Diana work so creatively gave me all the happiness in the world. Part of me wondered that if I'd supported Philip the same way, and tried to reach out more to Frances, perhaps either of them wouldn't be this way. A year later, Diana published her novel and it was a resounding success. Mark, although not finished with his manuscript, was excelling at his studies. When it was time for me to resume my teaching job, Diana instead encouraged me to start with my novel. And I couldn't be happier with her support. However, the events that were to occur next would change everything permanently. To celebrate the release of Diana's novel and to repair past relationships, Diana and I decided to visit Philip's house. We were curious to learn how Frances had been doing, and we didn't want any bad blood between us anymore. But it was impossible to predict the reaction to our visit. Lucy opened the front door and screamed at us, startling us. "What are you two doing here?" "We just wanted to celebrate Diana's novel. It's been a while and..." "You've just come to gloat, haven't you? You two should be ashamed of yourselves. What are you..." "I couldn't believe you two would do something like this to me. I was wrong to ever trust you. Philip was right about you." "Lucy, what are you talking about? Just get the hell out of our house." She slammed the door in our faces. We couldn't believe what had just happened. Diana rang the doorbell several times, eager to reason with Lucy and find out what had just happened. But we were only met with a cold shoulder. Crushed, we both silently returned home, scratching our brains and wondering what had happened. We decided not to share the incident with Mark. However, the ugly truth came out only a week later. Mark returned home one afternoon and Lucy had tagged along with him. Diana and I were shocked at her presence after everything, but Lucy told us that she wanted to explain herself and why she acted that way. The truth shook us to our core. "I'm sorry for the other day. It was wrong of me to say those things." "It's okay, Lucy. But what's the matter? What did we do to you?" "A while back, Philip told Frances and me that Martin had been borrowing money from his account, stealing it more like." "What?" "He also said that Diana would say terrible things about me behind my back, and that the two of you only acted sweet to me because you needed money, but would say disgusting things about Frances and me." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. To lie is one thing, but a lie of such proportions. How could Philip do such a thing, my own son? But when I spoke to Mark, and he told me things had been going great at home, and that Diana and you spoke about how much you both missed me, I realized that I was perhaps wrong to ever doubt you. "Lucy, we didn't take a dime from Philip. We haven't spoken to him in so long. How could he?" "I can't understand it myself. I spent so much time hating you because of this. But speaking to Mark made me realize it's probably not true." "It absolutely isn't. Why would we need to borrow money from him? And why would Diana say such things about you?" "I honestly don't know. I think Philip was just upset about what had happened at your house and has been angry ever since. It seems like he was trying to create distance between us. But I'm glad I met Mark so I could find out the truth." All of us were shocked by the revelations that were made. Diana and I couldn't believe the extent of Philip's lies. We were relieved that Lucy had at least discovered the truth. She seemed so much happier to learn that the allegations were false, and she felt at ease talking to us again. Lucy told us that Philip had recently purchased a new house for Francis to celebrate his graduation. They were hosting a Christmas party at Francis's new house next week, and she wanted all of us to make it. Mark, Diana, and I were anxious at the very thought of this. On one hand, I was furious and wanted to confront Philip as soon as I could. And on the other hand, I didn't want to do it at the Christmas gathering in front of Francis and his other friends. Lucy told us that she wasn't going to confess to Philip just yet, but that she would convince him to invite us to the gathering. She admitted that she was tired and done with the two of them. I don't care anymore. It's bad enough that I was made to hate the two of you. But it's terrible living with Philip and Francis. They insult me all the time, and at this point, I don't recognize either of them anymore. Francis is so rude to me, and he's worse than his father now. It's even more painful that I don't even recognize my son. This struck a deep chord within me. I immediately understood the helplessness and desperation Lucy was feeling. It was a gut-wrenching feeling indeed. I assured her that we were by her side and that if Philip was all right with it, we would attend the Christmas gathering and I'd have a conversation with him at the party. Lucy agreed and returned home. Mark admitted that he was nervous about the party, but I reassured him that it would all be okay. Lucy called us a few days later to let us know that Philip, although not too happy, had allowed us to attend the Christmas gathering. There was no turning back now, but none of us could have predicted the life-changing twist the party would hold. A week later, Mark, Diana, and I visited Francis's new house for the Christmas gathering. All of us were nervous, but looking forward to resolving any bad blood. As soon as we entered, Lucy greeted us at the front door with a cheery smile, but I could tell something was wrong. Francis was busy with his friends, and Philip said that he'd come in a second, but it was clear that he was ignoring us. As Diana and Mark mingled about the few guests, I pulled Lucy aside to ask if she was okay. Her face was one of heartbreak, and she seemed like she was about to burst into tears. She handed me 2 documents, and then proceeded to reveal 2 earth-shattering pieces of information. I could barely process what I just heard. I was unable to move or even think for a second. I fought back tears. It couldn't be. Just then, there was loud shouting from inside the living room. Diana, Lucy, Philip, and I rushed there to discover Francis and his friends ganging up on Mark. What's going on here? Shut up, Mom. Don't interfere. I'm just putting this kid in his place. Just decided to show up here to ruin the mood. Go where you came from, Hobo. No one wants you here. How dare you talk that tone to my son? Who do you think you are? My son is right, though. The other guests fell silent. I asked Mark to step aside as I came face to face with Francis and Philip. Lucy was restraining herself. I gave her a quick look to reassure her. I thought we could put the past between us, but clearly we can't. So how about you set the record straight with your friends and family here? About how you lied about me stealing your money. How about you admit that, you scoundrel? Francis seemed like he was about to explode. Philip went quiet. Don't you dare accuse my father, you liar! You're all just pathetic. I calmly held a thick document. Diana was speechless. Well, speaking of accusers and liars, how about you admit that you stole Mark's manuscript all these years ago? There were audible gasps. Both Philip and Francis froze in their places. How did you find that? Because I gave it to him, and I gave him something else too. Philip's face went pale. He knew what was coming. The guests seemed confused. I felt terrible doing this, but I had waited so long to silence my entitled son and grandson that I was eager to reveal the second document, which crushed me as a father. I've always loved you as my son, Philip, but I never imagined you could betray me this way. What? What's happening? I held up the second document, heartbroken. What? What did you get that from my safe? How could Lucy? I'm glad at least she wanted to expose the truth. How could you, Philip? Dad, what's happening? Is this about that letter? Philip's face grew worried. I felt further betrayed. Your son knew about this, Francis? Did you know? Well, of course. We're tired of you. I can't bear you anymore. My heart ached when I heard that. Diana and Martin seemed incredibly worried and confused. Darling, what's going on? Our son here wrote a letter to his lawyer along with Francis. The 3 of them were planning to steal from us by declaring us mentally incompetent and accusing Mark of manipulating us and stealing our money. They wanted all our money to themselves. Havoc wreaked in the room. Everyone was shocked, thinking about what they'd just heard. For the first time in years, Philip's smug, egotistical, and insulting facade disappeared and was replaced by that of the sensitive son I'd always known. Is this true? Yes, we hate the 3 of you. You and your fake grandson. We've had it with you. Well then, I have an announcement to make. As of today, I'm cutting both Philip and Francis from my will entirely. For all your lies, deceit, for dragging Mark into this, for stealing his manuscript. I thought you'd stoop low, but I never knew you'd be this shameless. You're lying! You can't cut us out! Dad, tell them! Diana, Mark, and I smiled. We hugged each other. A strong, unshakable bond between us. Francis was on the verge of tears, and Philip seemed stunned. He was exposed and would never be the same again. The three of us silently left, leaving Philip and Francis to deal with the consequences of their actions. I had to take that drastic step. Lucy decided to join us as we headed home. It wasn't easy learning these impossible and ugly truths about people. But life is a lot better when you face harsh truths and deal with the fallout. And that's what Philip and Francis had to do. I, on the other hand, couldn't be happier with this little family of my own. I immediately called my lawyer to safeguard Diana, Mark, and Lucy in my will, while removing Philip and Francis. I was crushed by the events of that day, but found solace in the fact that I had my entire life ahead of me with Mark, Diana, and Lucy. I felt happy, and mainly at peace. Through the strangest series of events, the truth was exposed, and justice was served.